many of you know, you're very familiar with Crotona and the fact that we're an international, intentional community here in Ojai, California. And on behalf of Maria Parison, the director of the Crotona School, and my colleagues Annie Johnson and Rochelle Rural, and Sue Prescott, who's not here right now because she's in Washington.
She's online.
Yes, she's online, and we miss her. It's good to see her face. We welcome you to today's program. I'm having a bit of a problem because these two people are my such closest friends that I was telling Rochelle it's very difficult to introduce them. Because I don't even know, I could tell you so much about them, but I could actually tell you nothing about them because I know that you'll have the beautiful pleasure of getting to know them. They're wonderful people to get to know. But for formality purposes, I'm going to do a little reading of their bios because it's quite interesting. Eduardo Grimaldia is he holds a degree from the National University in Argentina and currently teaches ancient religion and myth, as well as Sanskrit and literature. And that kind of blew me away. I said, you're teaching Sanskrit? How are you teaching Sanskrit? And then he started talking in Sanskrit, and I was just absolutely amazed. He joined the Theosophical Society in 2004 and has presented in both English and Spanish on a wide variety of theosophical subjects. He's also an astrologer, which it's been very, very interesting to listen to him talk about astrology because he brings it down to a very, very human, practical point of view. Which I just found fascinating. He was talking to me about, I forgot what you called it. It's horary astrology. And it's about trying to find, it helps you find missing things. So he went into the whole process of how that works, and it was absolutely fascinating. The other treat that we've had with Eduardo is the fact that he is I'm going to have to say this, he's a highly accomplished, he hates that term, he's a highly accomplished pianist and harpsichord player. And he plays, he's the principal pianist and harpsichordist for the Municipal Chamber Orchestra in Cordoba, Argentina. And he also teaches musical analysis and the history of music. And this Saturday, Saturday evening after the Spanish weekend, he will be playing here at 7 o'clock in the hall. So we're going to have, you are welcome to invite friends, family members, and so forth. But we've gotten to listen to a little bit of his practice, and everyone just sits and sort of melts because it's really lovely to hear him play. So the other speaker we have is Marcela Padella. It's not Padilla, it's because it's Padella. She's been a member of the Argentinian section since 2010 in Buenos Aires, and that's where I met her. And it was very interesting because I went to Argentina on a speaking tour, and Marcela hosted me. And she didn't know me, I didn't know her, and by the time my trip was over, she was my sister, my soul sister for the rest of my life. And she will remain my soul sister for the rest of my life. It was so interesting. She was also my translator, and we were teaching therapeutic touch. And there was a moment where I was saying something in English, and she was already saying it in Spanish. And we were in this place of the ethers where communication we didn't even need to speak. It was really fascinating. But in Argentina, she is an active member at the headquarters there, carrying out several administrative duties, as well as giving public lectures and workshops. And I have to mention this, because this was quite fascinating, and she was very proud and excited of this. In 2019, Marcella had been the coordinator for a new branch called Virya, which survived the pandemic and steadfastly continues today. And it's quite an accomplishment because there were many things that didn't survive the pandemic. But this group started, and she said that there is this magicalness of this group that she has started. She's very, very proud of it, and she has the right to be. She holds a degree in Human Resource Administration and teaches English as a second language. And she will be also participating in the Spanish Weekend program. So I know they're very nervous because the thing is that the English is not their first language, but they both speak English beautifully. They just don't have the belief that they do. So they're worried about how long the program is going to go on. So they said, don't do an introduction. It's going to take too long. We need the time to teach. So I'm going to hand this over to Marcella. She's going to start the program with a meditation.
Good morning. Yes, we're going to start with a meditation, and I would ask you to, first of all, to achieve comfort, alignment and control. We are told that as man thinks in his heart, so is he. And that is an occult statement of fact. Find a comfortable position, please. Take a few slow, deep, and quiet breaths. Find emotional stillness. Let go of any stress or worries. Attempt to be here now. Imagine your emotions are like a still pond of clear and pure waters. Then say 3 times to yourself, I, the observer, stand and see things flow. The mind is an instrument used by the thinker. Say, I see thoughts like clouds come and go, but I just observe. Recognize that you are the soul, the observer, an expression of love and light. Visualize a pure white light pouring down from the internal, overshadowing soul, flooding all the personality, stabilizing, purifying, quieting, and directing it in service. Then say, may the energy of the Divine Self inspire me and the light of the soul direct. May I, through that spiritual energy, which is my higher self, be led from darkness to light, from the unreal to the real, from mortality to immortality. Embraced with our Divine Self, we remain in stillness. And when you are ready, open your eyes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to this workshop on the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you, Anania, for the presentation. Thank you, Marcelo, for a beautiful meditation. So, the Gita requires, I think, no introduction in contemporary times, even the West. Many people regard it as one of the world's foremost spiritual classic, and I even found people who considered it their guide, their only and single guide to their inner life. Its popularity in India goes without saying, and although the author is unknown, obviously, we cannot pretend that Krishna, the historical Krishna, and all these deepest philosophical statements were said by a historical Krishna on the battlefield, on the Kurukshetra, as it is presented to us. But Hindus from all schools of thought hold it in great reverence. But before we go into the text, why not posing a few questions? Why study ancient literature? Why the Bhagavad Gita? Do these ancient texts give us a valuable insight on our own daily lives? If we embark on the reading of this ancient work, at first glance, the consideration of the issues it raises may seem very distant from the current prevalent and pressing topics, such as, let's just name but a few. I mean, why are we not talking about technology, artificial intelligence, and things up to date? But we know we're living in challenging times. Humanity is at a crossroads, and few can deny that this world crisis is huge. Many beliefs, if you let me quote from the Bible, many beliefs are shouted from the rooftops, but in spite of a wide scope of methods of spiritual development on the market, most of them really powerless to change our lives, to truly change our lives, it is logical that we can turn to an ancient wisdom, a perennial wisdom, and begin to suspect that perhaps the answer to our current problems have been there, lying for thousands of years, hidden in ancient poetry and philosophy. So, this is, by the way, what HPB tried to suggest when she undertook such a defense of the ancient authors. So, regarding these two questions, why the Bhagavad Gita, there's another one. Why this deepest jewel of philosophical wisdom has had so many commentators throughout the ages. You know, in India, happened the same as in the West. When some author wrote a very important piece with very important philosophical thoughts, there came after him many commentators trying to explain what he meant. And in a way, the enduring appeal and depth of the Bhagavad Gita has prompted a diverse array of commentators to elucidate its teachings, ensuring that its wisdom remains accessible, relevant, and applicable to people across different times, cultures, and philosophical perspectives. But so, if so much effort was needed to elucidate its teachings, we must conclude, as HPB did, that these ancient texts are not simple stories. We must have the right key to unlock its true meaning. We have to accept the possibility that HPV advocated, that namely that ancient minds have disguised in epic poems universal truths and even laid down the path every aspiring human being must take once he or she discovers that there's so much more than meets the eye. So when modern recipes do not work, the ancient texts come to our rescue, so to say. Blavatsky, since the inception of the Theosophical Society, has claimed that nothing is new under the sun, that no matter how new an idea may look like, someone has thought of it before, irrevocably. That is why she undertakes a strong defense of the ancient authors. And she implied that the rules for the path that takes us back to the source have been laid down for thousands of years. And this is only one reason why diving into the ancient texts may eventually provide us with that Ariadne's clue or thread out of the labyrinth of form and, let's just say, illusion. So, as a matter of fact, the need to explain ideas and meanings which our daily language fails to convey is an ancient problem. Certain truths and secrets were preserved in stories, apparently very simple, but with deeply symbolic content. And that was for two reasons. First, the need to protect that knowledge from those alien to a certain circle of students, the unprepared, so to say. But mainly because their meaning was of such a nature that it could not be conveyed by normal language. Thus, great sages used stories, fables, allegories to hide some deep truths which could only be understood by a developed intuition or with the possession of certain keys. Think of Plato's allegory of the cave, for instance. In 2 paragraphs, he managed to outline the whole path, if you let me quote from the Upanishad, from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, and from the mortal to immortality. So those stories fall under the category of what we call myth. Myth is, even by modern standards, a notoriously hard concept to define. What the ancient Greeks called mythos was quite different from what we and the media nowadays call myth. Originally, myths were tales, stories, down from generation to generation, when these myths hide a kernel of historical truth, the convention today is to call them legends. So we have myth proper. The stories are related to gods and the supernatural, and legend when there is some core of historical truth underlying the story. And the third category we know, folk tale, fairy tale. We all know this category from the stories we were told as kids. Easy to realize that these categories necessarily overlap. And in archaic Greece, all the memorable was transmitted orally through poetry, which often relied on myth. They always begin to circulate within an oral tradition, and only after centuries of recitation by heart, they were written. The Bhagavad Gita is no exception to this historical fact. We are now dealing with a certain kind of knowledge which was heard from the mouth of the master. And the ancient tradition always highlights the importance of hearing. You know, for instance, in India, how do they call the sacred writings? Shruti. Shruti is from the Sanskrit word to hear. Shruti means what is heard. And think of the Pythagorean tradition, for instance. What did the masters give the disciples? Little phrases for them to ponder upon, the akusmata. Akusmata, again, means what is heard. From that word comes acoustics today, because akuo in Greek is to hear. So hearing was an important factor that maybe today we have forgotten. The question often arises whether myths, including those stories we were told as kids, hide some truth inside. In this sense, a curious statement by H.P. Blavatsky made in The Secret Doctrine is often overlooked. She said that the study of hidden meanings and myths and legends had occupied the greater portion of her life. This is something, isn't it? She was convinced that no mythological story has ever been pure fiction. Each of them has an actual historical lining to it, and is a vehicle of certain universal truths being passed on. All the experience and learning revealed and acquired of the early races of mankind, those human beings who existed in times unrecorded by official history, found their pictorial expression in allegory and myth. And why? Because Blavatsky's thought, the spoken word has a potency unknown to, unsuspected and disbelieved in by the so-called modern sages. Certain vibrations in the air are sure to awaken corresponding powers, she said. Therefore, the events had to be harmlessly recorded in symbols and simple stories, so that their hidden meaning could be unveiled by free thinkers. Blavatsky spoke of an ancient, prehistoric, universal mystery language of symbols and myths. During the time Blavatsky wrote The Secret Doctrine, the language and literature of India was being disclosed to Western scholars. In Western society and academy, the discovery of the Sanskrit language was truly groundbreaking. For those early linguists, it came almost as a surprise that this language, so ancient and deep, so full of the deepest philosophy and thought, belonged to our own stem. However, to understand why, in order to understand why the Bhagavad Gita is so deeply esoteric and symbolic and hides a profound meaning, we should first understand its framework, the great poem called Mahabharata. Let us say a few words about its setting, namely the events recorded in the Mahabharata, which serve as the framework of the Gita. Those young officers arriving for the first time at a new home in India during the British occupation would commonly be told by some well-meaning India hand that if they wished to grasp the essence of the Eastern tradition, they should read one book, the Mahabharata, by far the world's oldest and largest epic poem with almost 100,000 verses. Imagine that it seats the whole Bible and all Shakespeare's plays bundled together. And for enthusiasts of classical literature, it's noteworthy that the Mahabharata's length far exceeds Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, which recount the renowned Trojan War and Odysseus' journey home to Ithaca, his native land. Western scholars typically hesitate to entertain the idea that this Indian epic predates Homer's work, considering the latter as the pinnacle of Western literature. Despite linguistic evidence supporting India's connection to our shared root race, referred to as Indo-European, India remains a somewhat overlooked chapter of our own Western history. No one says that. And scholars have found that almost all European languages come from the same stem as Sanskrit, the language of the Bhagavad Gita. They call it Indo-European. But this is just a scholarly classification. For those who inhabit India, Sanskrit is undisputedly the root of all modern languages, and its antiquity can hardly be imagined. The Mahabharata, for instance, was called the fifth Veda, and as a jewel within the heart lies the Bhagavad Gita, in itself a chapter of this great epic poem. Mahabharata means something like the great India or the great humanity, understood as the fifth race in terms of the secret doctrine. And because humanity is said to descend from original India. Now, we know that India has now two names, India and Bharat. Bharat comes from Bharata in Sanskrit, which means India, precisely. The composer of this great poem is supposed to be Vyasa, himself a character in the epic. This is a manuscript from the British Museum. And Vyasa, according to tradition, dictated the verses, and the god Ganesha wrote them down. Among the 100,000 verses of the Mahabharata, over 800 of them are considered to be the secret message, Vyasa Rahasya. Vyasa used to recite such verses in order to gain time to compose the next ones. It was agreed that Vyasa should dictate the stanzas continuously and without pause. Otherwise, the god Ganesha got angry and stopped taking dictation. Even today in India, where there are thousands of verses are still sung, the inherent meter and rhythm of the text facilitate memorization. You know, all the texts were to be sung. Sanskrit is a rhythmic language. It has long and short vowels. You should sing and recite them with a precise rhythm. And this is why they could remember the whole 100,000 verses for so many years before it was consigned to writing. It is important that we know what the story is about so that we can understand how its symbolism may be important for us. The story revolves around two sets of cousins. The Pandava, the 5 sons of the king Pandu, meaning the pale, and the Kaurava, the sons of Pandu's brother, the blind king, Dhritarashtra. The divinely born Arjuna, with his 4 brothers, was brought up with his cousins, the Kaurava, the court of the latter's father, Dhritarashtra, the king who, though legally disqualified by his blindness, has seized and held the throne. Not content with the seizing of the throne, the old king did not even hold the balance evenly between his sons and their cousins, the Pandava, but constantly favored the former. The Kaurava had a grotesque demonic birth, while the Pandava were actually fathered by gods and are assisted throughout the story by divinities and seers, including the very author of the poem, Vyasa, himself a character in the story. Each of the brothers, the Pandava, stands for a quality. Yudhishthira was born of righteousness and knowledge. He's the son of Dharma. Yudhishthira means the one who stands in battle. Bhima, which means the terrible, the fearless one, the son of the god of the wind, is the strongest of the world. Arjuna, meaning the shining one in Sanskrit, a main character in the Bhagavad Gita, son of the god Indra, is the perfect warrior. The next two are twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, which in a way they represent the higher and the lower mind. Look, Nakula means mongoose-colored, and Sahadeva, Saha with, Deva, gods, with the gods, meaning the polar opposites. The lower mind colored by desire, and the part of the mind which is with the gods. Nakula and Sahadeva. Arjuna and Krishna are the inseparable friends, are in fact well known to represent what is called Nara and Narayana, the human soul and the divine soul, the Jiva and the Atman. They are the two birds that are described in the Mandukya Upanishad. The two birds are eternal friends, seated upon the same tree, the body of whom one, the human soul, eats the fruit, while the other, the Atman, is like a silent witness, an observer. It's a beautiful image. But hostility soon developed between the two parties. And after a brief attempt to divide the realm, the kingdom between them, the Pandava were defeated at dice by trickery and made to wander in exile for 12 long years, followed by a 13th year in which their very whereabouts had to remain unknown. At the conclusion of this period, the well-meaning but weak king found it impossible to persuade his headstrong and evil-minded son, Duryodhana, to restore to the Pandavas their share of the kingdom. And in spite of fruitless attempt to bring about a reconciliation, the war could not be averted, and the rival hosts faced each other on the field of Kurukshetra. It is exactly at this point that the Bhagavad Gita begins. Suddenly, Arjuna loses confidence in everything he's about to do. As soon as he was about to sound the horn to launch the battle, he falls down at Krishna's feet and says, "Krishna, I cannot fight. My legs grow weak. My mouth is drying. My body trembles. My bow slips from my hands. Uncles, cousins, nephews, my own teacher, they're all there. I can't slaughter my own family." It is then that Krishna turns to face him, whispering to him a teaching that becomes the Bhagavad Gita, or the Song of the Lord Krishna. It is well nigh impossible to capture the very essence of this jewel of the deepest philosophical thought in a few days. But I wonder if you realize how unusual and unique this situation is, never seen in literature before, not even in Greek literature. While tension builds up between two armies, right at the moment of concentrated silence before the horror of war is unleashed, Krishna, in the middle of a battlefield, gives Arjuna the most sacred teachings. To these teachings we call Bhagavad Gita. So we see that the teachings of the Gita are spoken by Krishna, who is acting as the charioteer of Arjuna. They are overheard by some of the very interesting characters. Sanjaya, as the result of the blessing of Vyasa, the author of the scriptures, and who signifies the power of inspiration, and they are repeated to the blind king Dhritarashtra. This is the framework in which the teachings of the Gita are set. So, who are these people? And what is the significance of the two charioteers? Krishna, we have seen, is the divine soul who imparts the life-giving wisdom to the individual soul. The symbol of the charioteer is one that occurs in the Upanishad, in the Katha Upanishad mainly, and also in the dialogues of Plato. We find it in the Phaedon and two more dialogues of Plato. In the Upanishads, in the Katha Upanishad, the individual soul is described as a rider in the chariot of the body, while buddhi, a spiritual faculty we know from theosophical texts, is a charioteer. In the Gita, however, the use to which the symbol is put is slightly different. True, the individual soul in the form of Arjuna is still the rider of a chariot, but the charioteer is, as we have seen, the divine self in the person of Krishna. Dhritarashtra, on the other hand, the king Dhritarashtra, the blind king, represents the lower and transient personality, which, blinded by egoism and foolish infatuation, wields a nominal sway over the kingdom of the body, which it has unjustly seized. The word Dhritarashtra meaning the one who bears the kingdom, the one who has seized the kingdom. Dre is to bear, and Rashtra in Sanskrit is the kingdom or nation. So it's really a beautiful symbol of the personality who bears on his shoulders the kingdom, but he's blind. He has taken that kingdom illegally. Although Dhritarashtra arrogates to himself the title of king, yet his rule over the kingdom is merely nominal, for the real power lies with his son, just as the human personality, which so proudly says, I, is the sport of a continual succession of involuntary desires and passions, which are the real rulers of the body it calls its own. This character, Sanjaya, the charioteer and advisor of a blind king, is the link between the higher and lower minds. The mind has a dual status in Hindu philosophy. Sanjaya means victory. We hear Krishna says, the mind is said to be twofold, the pure and the impure. Impure by union with desire, and pure, completely free from desire. The impure mind is Dhritarashtra, the empirical ego, controlled by desire, his son Duryodhana. Incredible. Duryodhana, who represents desire, means duh in Sanskrit very difficult, is something difficult. Yodhana, war, fight. So what is difficult to fight? Desire. This is Duryodhana, representing the first son of the blind king Dhritarashtra, who represents the personality. So we have a symbol that matches the theosophical concept of the dual mind. And it is not easy to give a clear account of the relation between these two minds, or better perhaps the two aspects of the mind. The higher mind, though individualized, is pure and detached, and sees in its own clear light, while the lower mind is stained by its union with the principle of desire, represented by Duryodhana. Thus Sanjaya, this charioteer, though anchored in service to the blind king Dhritarashtra, yet reaches out to a faith in Krishna and constantly counsels his master to abandon his weak egoism and submit himself to the latter, to Krishna. It is thus Sanjaya who, when aided by the inspiration derived from Vyasa, the author of the scriptures, is able to overhear the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, and so to form a link between the inner knowledge of the soul and the dark ignorance of the self-centered personality. A beautiful suggestion of that lighted bridge the human being must eventually weave, which is called antahkarana in theosophical literature, so called, between the lower and higher minds. Not only the characters are highly symbolic, but also the events. We are now able to revisit the outline sequence of soul events that form the foundation and have culminated in the presentation of the Gita. The soul, leaving it behind its divine ancestry, became attached to a personality and lives amidst the conflicting forces that make up this world. On one side, those upward tending energies that lead back to the source. On the other, the downward tending energies which foster attachment to form. Remember that once they were defeated at dice, they were confined to exile, all the 5 Pandava, the brothers. This is Sanjaya. So they are really a symbol of the exile of the soul. And so we see that the conflict between these two groups of cousins gradually increases in strength. The attempts at partition of their respective spheres of influence having failed, as indeed they must fail, since all is one unity. An action and reaction must necessarily take place. The soul and its associates are deceived by the illusions of those downward tending forces and are condemned to long wanderings in the wilderness. During this period, a period in which in reality extends through long ages, the soul wanders about from birth to birth, performing actions and reaping the fruits. Reduced to powerlessness as it is, it yet slowly gathers wisdom as a result of its manifold experiences, and though exposed to countless hardships and perils, it is yet saved from utter disaster by the unseen power of its Lord, the divine soul. Experience, wisdom, and also powers are gained. For it is during this period that Arjuna gains his magical weapons and are later to be of such immense value to him. There comes a period when the forces of materialism seem triumphant and the very existence of the soul becomes a matter of doubt or even denial. But not forever can the soul be thus buried in darkness. The allotted period draws to its close, and the soul emerges from its obscurity with all its powers. A terrible conflict must take place. This is the conflict depicted by the Bhagavad Gita. We see it is an inner conflict, a symbol of a battle that takes place inside the human being. So, this being said, it is natural for anyone to question whether every incident in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita holds symbolic significance, and if it is feasible to discern a consistent symbolism throughout this expansive epic. There's no need to ask the question whether the author of the Bhagavad Gita had such a symbolism consciously in mind. Many, perhaps most, great works of art are filled with symbolism that is often quite unplanned by the conscious minds of their creators. And sometimes this symbolism is truer and more profound from the fact of its having descended from a region beyond the realm of conscious thinking. It embodies not the head knowledge, but the soul knowledge of the artist. And this is old story, you know. Porphyry, the great Neoplatonist, mystic and writer of the 3rd century, very much resorted to by H.P. Blavatsky, already at that time uncovered a wealth of symbolism in the epics of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Most modern scholars tend to reject all such interpretations as mere reading into the texts of meanings that were never intended by the author. But such a view is entirely superficial and is based on utter ignorance of the nature of the great art, which is always symbolic, because it is born in a realm whose only utterance can be in a symbol. If this is true of such a poem as the Odyssey, far more is it true of the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, a poem in which all the culture, all the aspirations, and all the traditions of an entire race found expression. Symbolism is in fact like beauty itself. Either you see it or you do not. And if it is seen, then it is as irrelevant to inquire whether it was consciously intended by the author as it is to ask whether the beauty was consciously intended by him. We might ask the same about Bach and his music, for instance. Were these great composers, Bach, Mozart, creating art and music out of nothing, from zero, so to say, or rather were they channels through which certain intuitive universal ideas, universal patterns could find anchorage on earth? Whether we realize symbolism or not, it simply is there, it exists. So at this point, we can really understand why HPB qualified the Bhagavad Gita as profoundly occult and esoteric. She relied heavily on the inherent symbolism of the story, cared little for the authoritative pronouncement of scholarship, and openly claimed that this epic story is a symbol of the challenges every spiritual disciple has to face. It could rightfully be called allegory, a myth or story used as a metaphor and intended to teach us something, if we can truly unveil its hidden meaning. The Bhagavad Gita deals mainly with the challenges of the disciple, and it is not some cryptic treatise of the affairs of an initiate or adept. The Gita is useful for all of us aspirants, and the challenges which Arjuna, the symbol of the disciple, faces are the problems of all disciples throughout the ages. It tells us much about his dilemmas, his battle with polarities, until in that supreme moment of transfiguration, he finds himself face to face with his own divinity. I have said that the Mahabharata is an epic poem, but what kind of a battle it refers to? An epic poem is a narrative poem that typically recounts heroic deeds and adventures of legendary or historical figures, generally in a very elevated style. The narrative always includes a central hero, a quest or journey, a divine intervention, and it generally focuses on the heroic ideals of a culture. But in the case, here's the rub, the crux of the matter. In the case of the Bhagavad Gita, this war is a metaphor of a battle that takes place inside the human being. The hero is the disciple who is submitted to tests and dilemmas. This disciple, Arjuna, is advised, instructed by Krishna, himself a god. This is again an inner experience, since Krishna stands for the inner divinity, the very soul of man, itself a reflection of his immortal spirit. And the conflict that takes place there, this is what I have just said. I'm delayed with the slides. So the conflict that the disciple faces, as exemplified by Arjuna on the battlefield, the Kurukshetra, is a profound and symbolic one. Arjuna confronts a daunting dilemma. All his acquaintances, family, friends, even his own master or guru, are aligned against him on the opposing side of the battle. As a warrior, he is compelled to engage in the act of slaying them. It is worthwhile to pause and reflect on the power of this vivid and deeply symbolic image. During the long ages of slumber, the soul has contracted all sorts of relationships and has submitted to the guidance of various ideals and traditions. And only now it is realized that all these relationships must be destroyed. And all these ideals that have often seemed the very goal of life, must be ruthlessly sacrificed on the battlefield, since now they are seen to be opposing the destined triumph of the soul. So up until now, the individual has been content to live within the narrow circle of family and race and bounded by the ties of kinship. He has felt that it was enough, and if he fulfilled the duties that he owed to his society and nation, if he attempted to live according to the ideals of his gurus, the religions and ethical systems in which by birth he found himself. But societies and races are all temporary, while the soul is eternal and in the end can rest on no support but itself. The simple creed of my country, right or wrong, lies in ruins, destroyed by conflicting loyalties, and the ideals which had uplifted him in earlier days are powerless to guide him any longer, as they are seen to be mere mental constructions, inadequate for the needs of the soul. So arrayed against him, he finds the army of his desires, the call of the blood, the prestige of habit and established custom. The ideologies which had sufficed in the past are all arrayed against him. And perhaps the most bitter fact of all is the knowledge that the glittering ideas of patriotism, of family affection, and of devotion to his religion, though they served as guides and teachers in the past, are in arms against the soul and must be symbolically slain. Arjuna even finds Bhishma and Drona, his dear teachers, on the other side, fighting against him. This is a situation in which every aspirant is faced and through which, sooner or later, it seems that all of us have to pass. Small wonder is it that Arjuna is overcome with utter dejection, and that his bow slips from his nerveless hand as he sinks down, overcome by an intolerable sadness, a sadness that is the inevitable experience of those who seek the path. The voice of Krishna can be heard only in silence, and as long as the heart is filled with the clamor of desire, the silver tones of the voice cannot be heard. So, this is where Arjuna says, very disturbed, Nayotsya, I will not fight. He said, I am afflicted by weakness and faintness. I ask you what is best. I am confused in my heart as to my dharma. This is the point where we can, if there are any comments, questions so far, and then we can make a little break. Yeah.
I think that most of your paragraphs are so loaded we could spend time just unpacking that, because you've made some incredible points, really. So there's a lot to come back to maybe later. Really wonderful. It reminds me why I love literature so much.
Well, in a way that happens with literature, where, especially in the West, but mainly nowadays, we are so accustomed to long texts explaining every item. But Think of the Yoga Sutras, for instance, the Bhagavad Gita and all the ancient texts. They condense a great deal of meaning in just one phrase. This is what happened in Pythagorean circles, for instance. The akusmata the disciples were given, they have to sort of meditate on that statement, maybe of 2 or 3 words, and in a way unfold a current of meaning that is contained in them. So it's a sort of being able to listen what is said, because they were not written. Imagine this work, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, was written several centuries after Christ in our chronology. It means that they were recited for thousands of years by heart. And this is what the later commentators try to do, to explain the meaning of certain more obscure statements. Shankara did that, and great philosophers, Bhakti. I don't know if maybe we can just read them and let our own intuition throw light on them. But yes, we're facing a kind of writing that we're not used to. In a way, it is a few words which contain a great meaning, and not the other way around. Many words to explain just one meaning. And we always find that the meanings are multifold. It may have many meanings at different levels. You.
I was just interested to know what translation you use, the English translation from the Sanskrit.
Well,
Whose? Yeah.
there are 2 kinds of translation. This is an interesting question. The most literal ones and respectful of the texts, and the ones which tend to interpret the text. Both are really good to have. So I always advise to have 3, 4, 5 translations. I'm sorry.
Are you familiar with Niklananda's translation and commentary?
Yeah, but it's
Ramakrishna.
fantastic. Prabhupada has another translation from the Hare Krishna with the advantage of having many words explained in Sanskrit with many commentaries I really don't pay attention to. Annie Besant did her own translation of the Bhagavad Gita. Ravi Ravindra has another one.
An interpretation.
Yeah. But you can face it from the problem of the language, which is very interesting, but also from the problem of how you interpret that. So some translations are more inclined to interpret, and some others are more inclined to be very faithful to the texts. Both are very useful.
So my question was, which one do you,
Well,
which ones do you prefer?
I use at 4, but in my case, as I teach Sanskrit, I need the bilingual translations. So translation for me is just a help to go to the Sanskrit texts. But I think in English we can have Besant's translation, Ravindra's translation is very good also, and the traditional ones. But I think any translation would help.
add something about Ravi Ravindra's translation. He said he wasn't happy with the translations he was reading, so he decided to do his own translation. Of course, that took many years, but I'm quoting him, that he said he wasn't happy with the translation, so he did his own.
Yeah, but even so, I really have much confidence in Ravi Ravindra's opinion, really. And, you know, no wonder that the same word for translator is the word for trader in etymological origin. You have that saying in Italian, traduttore traditore. It's almost the same word. A translation is always a treason in some way. And in Sanskrit, this is a really increased problem. But, you know, we always have our own intuition. So, shouldn't despair. Read one translation, read another one, meditate upon it, ponder upon it, and I think that one of the things we shouldn't do is just read the Bhagavad Gita from top to bottom all at once. Yeah, someone wants to say something.
I'll be brief because I know the break is almost. And I'm not getting any commission from our bookshop here. But in case it helps, when I was still living in the U.S. before going to India the first time, I tried Prabhupada with all my heart, and I couldn't get through much of that book because I didn't know any Sanskrit words. I was lost. Then when I got to India, I read first one Judge. And I read the whole thing, no problem. It was very, very clear. But it didn't touch my heart as when I read Annie Besant's and Bhagavad Das's edition. They worked together. And I was crying through most of that reading. To finish it, I was crying. It touched me so deeply. So for whatever it's worth, if it helps anybody, that was my experience.
Yeah. And some statements sometimes are obscure and they are interpreted differently. But you know, this is the advantage of Sanskrit. When you find something like, he who sees action in inaction and inaction in action, he is wise. We say, well, what the hell does this mean? But then Sanskrit has that possibility. You have karma and akarma, which also means silence. So if you say, he who sees action in silence and silence in action, he is wise. And then you approach it from a different angle. Shall we do the break now? Because otherwise...
Hi. As Eduardo said, meditation is a very important topic in the Bhagavad Gita. And I am going to speak about a few words about this in order to take chapter 6 tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I don't know how we are going to get it. But let's start. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to tell me or to ask me. Okay, as Eduardo said, to talk about the Gita is to get closer to the history of the world, its complexity, and the web of desires, thoughts, and activities that make up the evolution of humanity. The study and its understanding are difficult to contrast with the traditional teaching of an instructor. Nature, being the external reflection of the deity, teaches us with the voices that are sometimes difficult to understand because they are confusing to us and what do? They cause discomfort in our hearts. This is exactly what happens to Arjuna, who confused asked Krishna with supplications and prayers to teach him. Krishna responds wisely, but the result is that at the very beginning, Arjuna fails to understand. Precisely Arjuna, who is the ideal disciple, fails to see the sacred teaching that Krishna offers him. What does it happen? It happens that he's not in a position to learn, because we can see Arjuna in ourselves as well. Arjuna is not in a position to learn because the difficulty lies in the fact that Arjuna and ourselves are incapable of keeping our eyes open. Our will is weak, and we do not see clearly that it is difficult for us to leave the so-called comfort zone, don't we? This is the first lesson of the Gita. The disciple has to make himself. He can learn all the external teachings, read books, attend courses, but he may condition that wisdom to flourish in himself due to his own limitations. And why? Because this wisdom cannot be learned unless it is experienced. Only in this way, stage after stage, does it become possible for the disciple to understand these teachings. Hence, wisdom beckons us to recognize that the Supreme Being resides equally in all beings. The Lord dwells within the heart of every individual, constituting the inner essence of each one. For those who find meditation a hard task, a thorough examination of conscious and self-analysis must be done. Through this, we may come to realize firsthand that the root cause of our lack of success stems from a profound shortage of fervor and diligence, and I should add also devotion. We undertake on the method with a true enthusiasm for the very essence of meditation, because what do? We put the cart before the horse. The essence of this discipline lies in unveiling the complexity of our inner life, analyzing the hidden layers of the mind and consciousness, exclusive realms where solutions to our problems reside. Paradoxes are also inevitable when it comes to abstract operations of our internal worlds. It's impossible to understand these paradoxes with a mundane logic, which can be only understood with another rather intuitive logic, which is which gives it the touch of truth. Yet, if these issues lack a genuine connection with our own being, engaging in daily meditation becomes a meaningless exercise. So, therefore, it's crucial to recognize that meditation is not an end in itself. Rather, it functions as a powerful means toward a specific goal or resolution. By some mystics, the path has been divided into 3 stages. They are called the path of purification, the path of illumination, and the final one, the path of unity. The first 6 chapters of the Gita correspond up to a certain point to the path of purification. This concept of spiritual progression evolving from instinct to intellect and eventually to intuition is not only presented in the Gita, but also in the theosophical ideas. and also in many other religious traditions or philosophical traditions. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna teaches spiritual wisdom to Arjuna, addressing the evolution of consciousness and the path to real self-realization. The teachings emphasize the development of higher faculties, the refinement of one understanding, and the journey towards the state of intuitive knowledge and inner wisdom. The idea is that as individuals progress on their spiritual path, they move beyond instinctual and intellectual levels of understanding to a more profound, intuitive grasp of the nature of reality. This evolution involves transcending the limitations of the ego, the lower ego, and connecting with a higher universal consciousness. There's a metaphor where we all heard about the metaphor of the path being as thin as a razor edge, and the idea that only a few possess the perseverance and courage to follow it to the end. This highlights the challenged nature of the spiritual nature. The concept is also echoed in the Gita, where Lord Krishna states that among thousands of men, hardly one strives for perfection. And those who succeed in the struggle, only one truly knows the divine essence. What about these teachings? What do they emphasize? These teachings emphasize the rarity and difficulty of achieving true spiritual realization, don't they? The spiritual path is often portrayed as demanding, requiring inner strength, perseverance, and a deep commitment to self-transformation. Thus, the metaphor of the razor edge suggests the need for precision, balance, and unwavering focus to navigate the challenges and obstacles of the journey. So, the true purpose of spiritual pursuit should not be centered exclusively, and this is very important because many people have a selfish point of view. So I think this paragraph is very important. The true purpose of spiritual pursuit should not be centered exclusively on attaining personal nirvana or enlightenment, since this is considered as an exalted and glorious selfishness. Instead, the emphasis is placed on the self-sacrificing pursuit aimed at guiding others on the right path. The goal is to empower fellow beings to benefit from the spiritual knowledge and wisdom acquired through one's own journey. When I read this, I had the idea that we are like in a community, and we are tied through invisible bonds, and those who have develop more compassion, more love, more sense of unity are those who have the strongest bonds, and that they can help others who could not achieve those virtues yet. Or the image of a ladder. I mean, the one who is in a higher state can help because he is stronger. He knows and he understands what others are going through, trying to live the spiritual life, because he has been somehow he was there. She were there too, and it's a beautiful image to think that if we do our own task just to achieve self transformation, or at least be better persons, we can help so much to others. I mean, and somebody else would help us too. I mean, and that invisible thread. I like that idea. I mean, okay. I just so this idea aligns with the concept of altruism and service to others, suggesting that the ultimate fulfillment in spiritual practice comes not just from personal enlightenment, but from contributing to the well-being and enlightenment of others. It reflects a broader perspective of spiritual growth, viewing it as a collective journey where individuals aspire not only to elevate themselves, but also to assist and uplift those around them. Tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, I don't know how, but we are going to speak about the 6th chapter of the Gita, the yoga called the Yoga of Meditation. And that chapter marks the transition towards the path of illumination. What does it do, that chapter? It introduces a technique of mental discipline designed to smoothly shift consciousness from its ordinary waking state to the higher levels. These higher levels, which until now have remained somewhat covered, operating like a hidden force, occasionally manifesting as flashes of inspiration. They have always existed beyond reach, apparently beyond the control of one's will, appearing and disappearing seemingly at random, veiled in the mystery of an unknown law. The goal of the yoga school is to achieve union or oneness with the divine spiritual essence, which is essentially identical to the spiritual essence or logos of the universe. True yoga is a genuine psychology founded on a comprehensive philosophical understanding of the entire inner human constitution. Eduardo is going to correct me now. Patanjali. Patanjali provided a system which he called the 8 steps. I'm not going to refer, I was supposed to speak about yama and niyama, but it's going to be a bit long, so I'm going to refer to some of the aspects that constitute the true path to meditation. I mean, it should be the foundations. So let's think about the conditions that a disciple must need or must meet if they wish to enter the spiritual path. As I said before, Patanjali establishes certain guidelines that I will mention below, and these provide a solid foundation for further progress. I should try to avoid Sanskrit terms, but everybody has heard about ahimsa, that is to say, abstention from causing harm. And let's remember, we are talking about the necessary steps to meditate and to transform our lives. Yes, those are necessary steps to be taken. So, if our attitude and behavior towards all living creature is based on the recognition of the underlying unity of life, we have made a great deal. And to act properly requires the development and purification of the discerning faculty of buddhi, that is to say, the spiritual wisdom, which can only be acquired after an extended training in doing what is right at any cost. Another condition, that is to say, we should not lie. And not to lie has to be taken in a broader sense than just that. It means avoiding any exaggeration or inaccuracy or simulation or other similar mistakes that involve saying or doing what does not exactly agree with what is known to be true. Why? Because any form of light creates unnecessary complications in our own lives. And it's a constant source of mental disturbance. I read somewhere, I don't remember if it was HPV who said that when people lie, they create like shadows or clouds around their minds. And so it's impossible to discern. So truthfulness is absolutely necessary to develop intuition or buddhi. The armor of perfect truthfulness in thought, word, and deed creates the fortress that prevents the aspirant from the world of shadows, and so then no deception can hurt him. Another item we should take into consideration is to abstain from stealing, and also to refuse to any form of taking possession of someone else's property. And we're not talking only about money and goods, but also about intangible things, yes, so, or accepting credit for something he has not done, or the person hasn't done, or receive privileges that he does not properly deserve. We have a term here often heard, which is brahmacharya, the next one. And we're going to explain it in a broader sense, because it includes not only the abstinence from certain sensual enjoyments, but also the freedom from craving all kinds of sensual pleasures. The ultimate goal is the ability to interact with various objects like anyone else, but without the man becoming attached to enjoyable objects or repulsed by those which cause pain. The key quality to cultivate detachment, sorry, I will go on, otherwise I will enter something else which I already cut. Brahmacharya emphasizes the contact with an object that may produce sensation, but the man maintains a state of detachment, not being swayed by the experiences. Another one is the absence of greed. That's another step required, and revolves around the idea of refraining from the desire to accumulate possessions. The emphasis is placed on the attitudes towards possessions rather than the quantity of things owned. If someone is not emotionally attached to their possessions, the effort required to maintain them can divert time and energy. The cultivation of this virtue aims to foster a state of mind that is free again from attachments. Another step suggested refers to cleanness or purity, especially in relations to the various vehicles of man, of human being, both the physical body and the superphysical vehicles that serve as instruments of emotion, thought, and other spiritual faculties. Purification, what do we mean? What do we want to say about this? Involves eliminating elements and conditions within the individual's vehicles that hinder their functions and impede progress. The physical body's purification is relatively straightforward, and it's achieved by supplying it with the right type of foods and drinks, particularly those of the Savit type. Alcohol and drugs are strictly forbidden in this path. Purification of the subtle vehicles expressing thoughts and emotion is a more complex process, isn't it? It requires gradually changing vibratory tendencies by excluding undesirable thoughts and emotions from the mind and persistently replacing them with higher and more subtle ones. This transformative process alters the matter of the subtle bodies. a piece of advice, if you want to purify those subtle vehicles, the constant use of mantras and prayers is recommended in the Hindu system. This practice raises the vibrational rates of the vehicles, attracting spiritual energies from higher planes. This doesn't happen spontaneously, so the practice must be constant, and it requires many exercises. I mean, we have to be steady on that. Any questions up to now? Yes.
Ahimsa,
Oh,
the abstention from doing harm. This is something I've struggled with my entire life. Ahimsa versus lying. It's very difficult for me to get through life without lying. And a lot of my lies, so I don't hurt people. So I'm trying to practice ahimsa by lying. And there's a conflict within me about this, but it's just not in my compassionate nature to hurt someone, so I will lie. How do you negotiate that conflict? And does everyone else have this conflict too? My mother was dying of Alzheimer's, and she said, "Oh, where's my mom?" And she, Molly was my mother, my grandmother's name. So, Molly's died. And my mom starts crying hysterically, like she just discovered it for the first time. She'd been dead 50 years. So then 10 minutes later, she asked me, "Where's Molly?" And I want to tell the truth. I go, "Oh, Molly's dead." And then she starts crying again because she didn't remember she learned it. So at a certain point, I just had to lie to her and say, "Molly's not here." And it caused some kind of conflict in me. I didn't want to lie, but I couldn't hurt this woman. So how do you navigate this? And I'm open to suggestions from anyone else too.
Sometimes it's difficult because, as you said, if you say the truth, perhaps you are going to hurt somebody who is not well, who needs to be taken care of. I should take into consideration the motive. Why am I lying? If the motive is selfish, then I'm a great liar. If the motive is to leave somebody in peace, like your mother, then you're lying. But not every. I think we have shades or degrees in all the things I spoke. There are shades. You cannot. We have this life today, and we must do our best with what we can, with our inner resources. And I think that if we cultivate those resources, next life, our talents, our inner resources should be greater or stronger or more spiritual. The thing is that we have to deal with everyday life, and we are here in this world, and we aspire, and we would like to live in the master's world, or to be near their consciousness. And it's impossible. When you put your feet on the ground, but there are shades. And I think that motive is all. Why are you saying a lie or telling a lie? Why? If you're going to help somebody, then it's not that bad. But if your motive is to take something for you or to hurt somebody, well, I don't know.
In the story of the Mahabharata, Krishna lies quite a few times because he wants to achieve its ends. So what shall we do? Maybe in one of the Mahatma letters we read, to be in this Western society necessarily implies non-truthfulness. To be absolutely truthful, one of the masters said, in this Western society is almost impossible. So what shall we do with this?
As the master says, you will be outcasted in the Western society. I mean, you will have no, I mean, you will be in trouble all the time.
Krishna steals too.
Steals.
The clothes from the gopis.
Steals. Yeah.
It's not black and white.
No, that's why I
Maybe
said there are
it's-
shadows. There are degrees. I mean, yes.
Earlier, when you were speaking about the goal should not be one's personal enlightenment or realization, but to be able to help other people and such. I kept remembering someone asked Rama Maharshi once, about Advaita Vedanta, and said, but what about the others, meaning helping other people? And his response was, there are no others. I wondered how you would interpret that, or understand that. He said there are no
There are
others.
no others. That's true.
Because when the perfect union's there, the last step, the realization after enlightenment, there are no others. I think
No,
that's-
the unity and unity
So
arises.
there are the others. So, anyway, I'm not playing devil's advocate.
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. No, because as I said before, we are speaking about the first stages, and we are here for a reason. I mean, there are others. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying it's a tricky question, but I know that we are separated as. I mean, but at the same time, we are all together. I mean, that spark is in all of us, but we are in different positions or different degrees of spiritual realization. And so it's necessary. I mean, for me, I'm not saying that I'm separated from them, but if I'm not going to speak about myself, but if the intentions or the motives are to help others, for instance, to teach a child is a separate individual. You have to teach him not to lie, or to embrace him, or to advise him to be compassive towards all reigns of nature. And in that sense, I spoke. I know that we are all together, even though we don't realize that. There's a saying I will say tomorrow, it's in my notes, that God is in everybody, in every man's heart, on every creature life, or in the heart of every man, but God, but men, let me see if I can remember the saying. God is in every man's heart, but not every man has God in his own heart. And I think that's the position in which we are, if we see somebody, or we are in, because karma brings what we need to learn, and the persons or the people that come to us for a reason. I believe in, not believe, I trust that.
I think it may be a question of levels, because of course the pure Advaita would say there is no everyone, there is that.
Yes,
I've
but
always, from my years in India, had the feeling, if you see a great sage, he's not trying to help. His goal is not to help. It's like the sun shines. The sun doesn't say, I'm going to shine so the vegetables will grow. He's just shining, it's just shining. And the effect is the helping, but it's not a goal.
yes,
I don't know,
you are,
it's a different point of view.
yes, I know, but perhaps
It's not the Christian point of view. It's something.
or perhaps the sage has the ability to transform other people's lives without saying any words.
Well, When they say words, I don't mean.
or
anyway,
words
doesn't
or
mean
attitudes. Yes,
Something to consider.
yes,
Other-
thank you.
Uh,
Annie,
We've got Pablo and Michelle online.
I just wanted to say quickly that in Hinduism, as well as in Buddhism, there is this idea of the two levels of truth, the absolute and the relative. In the non-dual traditions, they always talk about the absolute truth. And we have to be careful not to interpret absolute truths and try to apply them to the relative world, because in the relative world, there are others. But what this means is that we can relate to the other with a sense of unity, because ultimately speaking, we are all one. So this is it's always difficult to try to learn how to apply absolute truths to the relative world.
Thank you, Pablo.
great. Eduardo, do you have some notes? Ah, Jorge,
No. The practical way of approaching that is from the words of Krishnamurti in the At the Feet of the Master, that it is better not to stay in esteem unless it is truth, kind, and helpful.
well said. Maria,
Yes, in relation to what Pablo has just suggested, it seems to me that every moment in relationship has its level of truth, and the need is to become more and more sensitive to the deepest need in each one of us, and it's that to which we respond. If a person, for example, has dementia or is in other ways emotionally or physically disabled, there is a level in which we understand what that is, because we can automatically acclimate ourselves to that situation, and we speak to that level of truth, understanding that whatever we say can lead to some kind of clarity for them, but it needs to be appropriate to the moment.
yes, Idarmis.
Going back to the Sam's question to the conclusion of our discussion up to now, I would say that he was practicing ahimsa when he thought he was lying to his mother. So there is no need to feel guilty about that at all. Because of his motive, you absolutely agree with you that it all starts with the motive.
Yes, yes,
We have a very good word in theosophy, discernment. And I think that a lot of things depend on that discernment, common sense. There are times when you need to do the right thing and it may not be a complete truth. I think it's very good that Maria, as also a medical professional, that she pointed out that there are people who are in some ways affected, in some ways there's a problem there. You're not going to take somebody like that and battle with them, lock horns about the truth.
no, because you will hurt them. Definitely. We have some minutes more. Do you mind? Ah, yes,
I was
Susan.
just gonna say something about having compassion, because we've all been there and done that. You know, pretty much everything that we go through, we've already experienced, and we understand other people's need because we have it within ourselves. Even if we've had to be challenged to rise above a particular desire or attachment, we can all relate to desire and attachment. So judgment is probably never appropriate. Discernment, yes. Judgment.
Yes. I will go ahead. I will. We were speaking about the advice to say mantras. Another advice is to read this type of spiritual literature, because in a way it begins to, I mean, the knowledge begins to touch your heart, not only your mind, but it begins to change your attitude or your feelings towards everything. I mean, for me, theosophy books have changed my point of view about so many things, and that's why it's important. I mean, in my country, I'm speaking about my country, many people said, it's not necessary to study, it's not necessary to read books. And for me, it's one of the very first steps. You have to read, you have to know what we are looking for, or what you're looking for, and in what ways. You cannot be engañado, deceived. Thank you, Eduardo. Deceived if you don't have a solid background on spiritual items. This world is full of literature mixed with other intentions and with false ideas. So it's very important to, I mean, a piece of advice is to read and to gradually that knowledge will become intuition. Yes. And little by little, in the way of meditation, we may, if we are persistent with our practice, reach other levels, such as we will be able to withdraw our consciousness from external objects, and we will have a mental concentration, a very steady mind. We will be able to contemplate or meditate free from external distractions, and the latest steps should be to be able to complete our consciousness and its faculties into the higher self. That should be the highest level to be achieved. But of course, we have to be patient with ourselves, but not to indulge ourselves. This is a practice that has to be done every day, and it should be applied not half an hour in the morning or 15 minutes in the morning, but all day through. Yes, this is a 24/7 and 7 hours work and 7 days work. Sorry. Patanjali says there are 3 causes that hinder our spiritual possibilities, and they are very common in our lives: greed, anger, and confusion. Yes. And he says that all these mental conditions precede evil thoughts, feelings, and acts that dim the light of Buddhi. And this makes us unable to judge good and bad. This confused and cloudy state of mind provides the groundwork for bad thoughts, feelings, and actions. Hence, it's advised to reconsider the opposites and thus dispel the confusion. We are going to speak about yoga tomorrow, the steps that Eduardo will speak about that. But then, after all, what is meditation? we spoke about all the necessary steps in order to get into the path of meditation. But it's a method, it's a defined method. It's a scientific method as the theosophical tradition. It has a method. The master said, we have a method to learn, to achieve knowledge. Yes. So we must be consistent, and we must apply that method every day in our lives, and every day. I mean, when I said before, 24 hours a day, yes. And this process is slow and requires effort, and the results achieved depend on the beginner's stage of evolution, how much they meditated in previous lives, and how much they are meditating in this life. Yes. What happens to consciousness during meditation? The consciousness is set in motion by receiving vibrations that correspond to the individual's feelings, that is to say, the astral or the emotional planes, or thoughts from the mental plane. And these vibrations are a type of matter that responds appropriately to the impulse received if they vibrate. This is a very long word for me, sorry. Synchronously, sincronicamente. The mental body is modified by all types of thoughts, while the emotional body is affected by the vibrations and sensations. As I said before, meditation is not a superficial routine. It's not an end in itself, but it's a mean to an end. In this context, meditation is seen as a tool to delve into the hidden layers of the mind and consciousness to find solutions to inner problems. However, if these problems are not recognized or felt, meditation may become futile or lack the transformative power it is intended to have. Knowing the type of thoughts and feelings that are desirable for spiritual development, as we mentioned before, and achieving it is just a matter of deciding, working patiently, and sustaining the practice. The lack of constant practice is the root cause of failure in the meditative process. So, the radical transmutation of the mind requires a willingness to change one ways of life fundamentally. There's no other way out. Yoga is a way, or is a mean to renew the mind, involving meditation, moral duties, noble thoughts, good actions, and kind words. Yoga implies that during the spiritual journey, the old self dies and a new consciousness is born. Overall, the serious and transformative nature of the yogic path calls for a wholehearted commitment to inner growth and willingness to undergo profound changes in one's life and consciousness. And I would like to hear you, because I finished for today, but I said so many things, and they are all related, I know, but there are certain points which have to be stressed upon this journey. So, any comments, any questions? Yes, Nika.
Yeah, going back to Ramana Maharshi's insight about there are no others. When I read that, it kind of startled me, and I was very surprised it was so well said. And indeed, he came from the point of view of the there is a relative and absolute. So he was
already in that state that he could just deliver from that. But and then we're talking about not speaking, not really teaching, but just being. And again, speaking about Ramana, when I went to visit his cave where he sat for about 14 years in silence, and people would go and visit that in India, in Tiruvannamalai, somewhere in the south. I remember going in that, and he wasn't there, although when he was fasting and his disciples were begging him not to go, not to transit, he would say, where can I go? Where can I go? There's like nowhere in and out. But I remember he wasn't there physically. And I was overcame by such a strong feeling that tears would just pour, and I had no idea. I was taken by surprise again. I had no tissues and I was all wet for a long time, and I had no, it wasn't a sorrow or sadness. It was something else, and that's presence. So he was gone, but his presence was there. And I think that people who are on this path can, like you were saying earlier, can help all of us elevate just by being. And it was very powerful teaching that
you feel the unity, I mean, the love, the kindness, and I don't know, that's very personal.
And my granddaughter, when she was 2.5, picked up his picture. When the first time she saw his picture in our house, she picked up the picture and looked into his eyes, Ramana, and tears started. And I was speechless. I did not want to say anything. I just observed, and later on I took the camera to follow her when she put the picture back. Must be some kind of recognition from the eyes, from past lives, but something was there. Yeah.
Eduardo.
It is fascinating how we should be prepared to re-signify words when we talk about this process of yoga, especially involving meditation. When tomorrow we will speak about study and knowledge, but when you say in the niyamas, you have study, and it is interesting to note that in Sanskrit, there's no difference between reading, studying, and pondering. It's the same verb. So if you say read, you mean sit down to think about that and pondering on it. It is the same as reading and repeating. So the same name for that in the niyamas is swadhyaya, and dhya is the root for meditation, dhyana. So that could also be translated as self-meditation. So it gives a whole different outlook on what we call study, which should be a sort of meditation.
There is a word for discrimination, viveka chudamani. Sri Shankara talked about discrimination, or same as discernment, so that is also there, I think.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry, Maria, I think we're way past our time. Aren't we?
Yes.
We are, yeah, so we can, what I was gonna say briefly is that, and it relates a little bit to each of these last comments, is that one of the first, phrases from the Gita you put on your screen, and they were very different. The first was something to the effect that, my heart is weighed by faintness, and I am confused about my dharma. There's a rhythm to that. It's very poetic. The second one was very different. It was like discussion. And underneath the rhythm of that first one, if you say it to yourself quietly, or even think about it quietly, it's like a heartbeat. It affects the heart. The words affect the mind, but the rhythm engages the heart. And so that it comes alive in a completely different way, at least for me. And it seems to me that that's the difference in some ways between concentration and being drawn into a more contemplative relationship with the material itself. And I think that's why we respond differently to different translations. The ones that are more literal and conversational, for me, are not moving. They don't have that rhythm of a heartbeat that entrains itself with my own. So that's.
Tomorrow. Thanks for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.